Welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing a full and detailed breakdown of one of the most gripping and emotionally intense disaster films of the last decade, and that movie is Greenland, released in the year 2020. Greenland is a 2020 American disaster thriller film. It is directed by Rick Roman Waugh and written by Chris Sparling. This is a purely American production, produced by ST's Films, Anton, Thunder Road, G-Base, and Riverstone Pictures. The director, Rick Roman Waugh, is an American filmmaker who had previously worked on gritty crime thrillers before stepping into this large-scale survival story. The screenplay was written by Chris Sparling, who crafted a very human and grounded narrative despite the enormous and world-ending scale of the disaster at the center of the story. Now, the title of the movie, Greenland, is not just a random name. It has deep significance to the story itself. As the film progresses, it becomes clear that Greenland, the island nation in the North Atlantic, is the location where underground military bunkers have been prepared to shelter a select group of survivors from a comet that is about to destroy the Earth. So the word Greenland in this film represents the last hope, the final destination, and the only chance at survival for the human race. What makes Greenland stand apart from typical disaster movies is that it does not try to be a spectacle-driven blockbuster in the traditional sense. Instead, it is deeply personal. It keeps its focus entirely on one family, their struggles, their love for each other, and the incredible lengths a father is willing to go to in order to protect his wife and child. It is a film about human nature, both the good and the terrible, and how ordinary people respond when civilization begins to collapse around them. The film carries a PG-13 rating for intense sequences of disaster action, some violence, bloody images, and brief, strong language. It runs for approximately 1 hour and 59 minutes, making it a lean and tightly paced film that never wastes a single moment. Plot details. Now let us get into the full plot of the movie, and be warned, this section does contain spoilers, so if you have not watched the film yet, you may want to skip ahead. The story begins in Atlanta, Georgia, where we are introduced to our main character, John Garrity, a structural engineer. John is estranged from his wife Allison, and the two are living separately, though they are trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for the sake of their young son, Nathan. Nathan is a sweet and intelligent child who also happens to be diabetic and requires regular insulin injections, which becomes an extremely important detail as the story unfolds. On this particular day, John returns home to spend time with his family and their neighbors, as the world is buzzing with excitement over a recently discovered interstellar comet named Clark. Scientists and the media have been reporting that the comet will pass near Earth, and it is expected to be a spectacular astronomical event. Everyone is treating it like a celebration, gathered around televisions and backyards to watch what they believe will be a harmless and beautiful light show in the sky. But everything changes very quickly. A fragment of the comet unexpectedly breaks off and strikes Tampa, Florida, causing a massive and catastrophic explosion that kills thousands of people instantly. The entire world is stunned. News reports begin flooding in, and it becomes terrifyingly clear that Clark is not just one comet passing by. It is a planet-killing comet made up of multiple fragments, and those fragments are going to strike Earth one by one over the coming hours and days, and the largest fragment is projected to make impact in approximately 48 hours, an impact that scientists believe will cause a global extinction-level event. In the chaos that follows, John receives an automated emergency alert on his phone, a presidential notification that is sent only to a select group of individuals. The message tells John that his family has been pre-selected for emergency government sheltering, and they are instructed to pack essential supplies and report to Robins Air Force Base immediately, where military transport will take them to safety. The exact criteria for who was selected is never fully explained, but it is implied to be based on profession, health status, and other government-determined factors. John rushes his family to the airbase, and what they encounter there is pure chaos. Thousands of people who were not selected are desperately trying to get in. There are military personnel attempting to maintain order, and the emotional weight of seeing who gets to survive and who does not is deeply heartbreaking. The Garrity's are processed and are about to board a military aircraft when a soldier discovers that Nathan is diabetic. Because of the medical supplies and special needs that diabetic individuals require in a long-term survival situation, Nathan is turned away, and therefore the entire family is denied boarding. This single moment is the turning point of the entire film. The family, who had a guaranteed ticket to safety, is suddenly left on their own in the middle of a collapsing world. From here the film splits into two parallel storylines for a portion of its runtime. Allison and Nathan, separated from John during the chaos at the base, seek refuge with Allison's parents. Meanwhile, John, desperate to find another way to get his family to safety, learns from a fellow survivor that there are private planes flying out of Osgood, Ontario, in Canada, that are headed to Greenland, where the military bunkers are located. John decides to make the dangerous journey to Canada. As both John and Allison navigate their separate paths, the film shows us the full spectrum of human behavior under extreme pressure. They encounter people who are generous, selfless, and kind, offering shelter, food, and help to strangers. But they also encounter people driven to desperation, cruelty, and violence. At one point, Allison and Nathan are kidnapped by a couple who want to use them as a way to get access to the military shelter, using Nathan's pre-selection bracelet as leverage. This sequence is particularly tense and disturbing, as it shows how quickly morality can collapse when survival is at stake. John and Allison eventually find their way back to each other, and together they push toward Canada with Nathan in tow. Every step of the journey is filled with danger. Roads are congested, people are panicking, law and order have largely broken down, and comet fragments continue to strike the Earth, each one causing devastating destruction. The filmmakers do an exceptional job of making you feel the scale of the disaster without ever losing focus on the intimate family story at the center. As the hours count down and the final massive fragment approaches, John, Allison, and Nathan finally reach a small group of survivors who have access to a private aircraft. They make a desperate last-minute flight toward Greenland, and the film builds to an extraordinary climax as the largest fragment of Comet Clark enters the atmosphere and strikes the Earth. The shockwave and the destruction are shown on a massive and terrifying scale. The film ends with the Garrity family safe inside the underground bunkers beneath Greenland, having survived the apocalypse. As they and other survivors emerge days later onto a surface covered in ash and devastation, there is a quiet but powerful sense of hope. The world has been largely destroyed, but humanity survives. Families are together. And the long, difficult work of rebuilding is about to begin. It is an ending that is both sobering and quietly moving. Cast. Now let us talk about the cast of this film, because the performances are one of the biggest reasons Greenland works as well as it does. Gerard Butler plays John Garrity, the lead protagonist. Butler is a Scottish-American actor best known for action roles, but in Greenland he delivers one of his most restrained and emotionally grounded performances. He is not playing a superhero or an action legend here. He is playing an ordinary man, a husband and father who is terrified, exhausted, and desperate, and that relatability is what makes his character so compelling to watch. Morena Baccarin plays Allison Garrity, John's estranged wife. Baccarin is a Brazilian-American actress known for her roles in television dramas, and she brings real emotional depth to Allison. She is not simply a supporting character waiting to be rescued. She is an active, resourceful, and fiercely maternal figure who carries enormous weight throughout the film, particularly in the scenes where she is separated from both John and Nathan. Roger Dale Floyd plays Nathan Garrity, the young son of the family. Floyd was a child actor at the time of filming, and his portrayal of Nathan is remarkably natural and moving. Nathan's diabetes is not just a plot device. It is used to humanize the stakes of the film and to force the audience to think about how a collapsing world treats its most vulnerable members. Scott Glenn plays Allison's father, Dale. Glenn is a veteran American actor with decades of experience, and he brings quiet authority and warmth to the role of a grandfather who loves his family deeply. David Denman and Hope Davis play Ralph and Judy Vento, the neighbors of the Garrity family. Their characters represent a very specific and uncomfortable moral complexity, as their desperation to survive leads them to make choices that are deeply troubling. Hope McCallany also appears in a supporting role, and Andrew Batchelor, known widely by his social media name King Bach, appears as a soldier at the air base, bringing a brief but memorable presence to the film. Release date. The release history of Greenland is somewhat complicated, and it is directly tied to the COVID-19 pandemic that was affecting the entire world at the time of the film's completion. Greenland was originally scheduled for a wide theatrical release in the United States in the summer of 2020. Principal photography had been completed in May 2019 after pre-production began in late 2018. The film was fully ready. But as COVID-19 forced the closure of cinemas around the world, the theatrical release was delayed multiple times throughout mid-2020. The film did manage to release theatrically in international markets. Belgium was the first country to see it in theaters, with its release beginning on July 29, 2020. France followed on August 5, 2020, and Scandinavia received it on August 12, 2020. The film performed well in these markets, proving that audiences were hungry for exactly this kind of intense, grounded thriller. For the United States, however, the studio eventually made the decision to bypass theaters entirely and release the film through video on demand. It became available for digital purchase on December 18, 2020, released by Estes Films. It was later made available to rent, and eventually the streaming rights were sold to HBO for an estimated $20 to $30 million, after which it became available on HBO Max and Amazon Prime. The film was released on DVD and Blu-ray on February 9, 2021, and a 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray edition was released as recently as March 31, 2026, showing that the film continues to find new audiences years after its initial release. Trailer and marketing. The official trailer for Greenland was released ahead of its planned theatrical launch and immediately generated enormous interest online. The trailer does an excellent job of establishing the emotional core of the film without giving away too many of the story's most intense moments. It opens with the seemingly normal family gathering, transitions quickly into the shock of the first comet impact, and then builds through rapid cuts showing the chaos, the desperate journey, and the stunning visual scale of the disaster. The studio spent an estimated $10 million promoting the film domestically in the United States, which was a significant investment for a film that ultimately did not receive a traditional theatrical release in that market. The trailer highlighted the performances of Gerard Butler and Morena Baccarin prominently, and the marketing leaned heavily into the emotional family angle rather than simply selling it as an action spectacle. This was a deliberate and smart choice, as it helped Greenland stand out from the overcrowded disaster movie genre. Production and budget. Greenland was produced on a budget of approximately $34 to $35 million, which is remarkably modest for a disaster film of this scale and ambition. The visual effects team did an outstanding job of creating destruction sequences, comet impacts, and apocalyptic imagery that feel genuinely terrifying without relying entirely on the kind of over-the-top CGI excess that plagues many big-budget disaster films. Filming took place across several locations, with portions shot in Conyers, Georgia, among other places. The production team worked hard to ground the film in recognizable, everyday American settings, which makes the encroaching disaster feel all the more real and personal. Despite its modest budget, Greenland went on to gross approximately $52.3 million worldwide, making it a financial success, particularly considering the circumstances of its release during a global pandemic. The film proved that audiences respond to disaster films when they are rooted in genuine human emotion rather than pure spectacle. Critical reception and legacy. Greenland received generally positive reviews from critics, with most praise directed at the performances, the pacing, and the film's commitment to human emotion over empty spectacle. Audiences responded particularly strongly to Gerard Butler's more vulnerable and grounded performance, which many considered to be among the best of his career. The film has frequently been compared to classic disaster movies such as Deep Impact, The Day After Tomorrow, and Armageddon, but reviewers consistently noted that Greenland distinguishes itself by keeping the camera tightly focused on its family rather than cutting away to government officials, scientists, or multiple storylines in the way that those films typically do. The film holds a rating of 6.4 out of 10 on IMDb, which reflects a solidly well-received and crowd-pleasing production that delivered exactly what it promised to its audience. Critics appreciated that it did not try to be something it was not. It is a disaster survival film with a heart, and it executes that concept with real skill. Following the success of the first film, a sequel titled Greenland 2, Migration was developed, with director Rick Roman and the core cast of Gerard Butler, Morena Baccarin, and Roger Dale Floyd all returning. The sequel centers on the Garrity family's journey across a frozen and devastated European wasteland as they search for a new place to call home in a post-apocalyptic world. The sequel was released in January 2026. Complete story. The beginning, a normal day before the end. The story of Greenland begins like any ordinary day in the life of an ordinary American family. We are introduced to John Garrity, a structural engineer living in Atlanta, Georgia. John is not a hero in the traditional cinematic sense. He is not a soldier, not a scientist, not a government agent. He is simply a man, a husband and a father, someone you might pass on the street without a second glance. And that ordinariness is precisely what makes everything that follows so powerful and so emotionally devastating. John and his wife Allison are estranged. Their marriage has hit a wall, cracked under the pressure of whatever troubles had built up between them over the years, and now the two of them are living apart, navigating the awkward and painful territory of two people who still care deeply for each other but are not sure how to find their way back. Despite the distance in their relationship, they are united in their love for their young son, Nathan. Nathan is a bright, curious, and warm-hearted child with a deep fascination for space and the stars. He is also diabetic, and this detail, which seems like a simple character trait early in the film, becomes one of the most critical elements of the entire story. On this particular day, John comes home to spend time with his family. The world outside is buzzing with excitement because astronomers have recently discovered an interstellar comet called Clark. The comet has been in the news for weeks, and scientists and media personalities have been tracking its path. The consensus among experts, at least as it has been presented to the public, is that Clark will pass near Earth but pose no real danger. It is being treated as a once-in-a-lifetime astronomical spectacle, something to gather around the television for, something to celebrate and marvel at. So John, Allison, Nathan, and their neighbors, including Ralph and Judy Vento, settle in together for what they believe will be an exciting evening of watching a comet streak across the sky. There is food, there is conversation, there is the kind of easy, familiar warmth that comes with good neighbors and a family that, despite its fractures, still knows how to share a moment together. It feels safe. It feels normal. And that sense of normalcy is crucial, because what is about to happen will shatter it completely and forever. The first impact, everything changes. Without warning, the mood shifts. News broadcasts begin reporting something that was not supposed to happen. A fragment of the comet Clark has broken away from the main body and is entering the atmosphere. Before anyone can fully process what that means, a massive and blinding explosion tears across the sky. A fragment of the comet strikes Tampa, Florida, and the destruction is immediate, catastrophic, and absolutely terrifying. The explosion is visible from miles away. The shockwave is felt across an enormous distance. Thousands of people are killed in an instant. The mood in the Garrity household and across the entire country shifts from celebration to horror in a matter of seconds. News anchors are visibly shaken as they try to report what little information is coming in. Scientists who were previously assuring the world that Clark posed no threat are now scrambling to revise their assessments. And what they are discovering is far worse than anyone had imagined. Clark is not a single comet passing safely by. It is a massive collection of fragments, many of which are now on collision course with Earth, with the largest fragment, enormous beyond comprehension, projected to make direct impact with the planet within approximately 48 hours. The impact of that final fragment, scientists are saying, will be an extinction-level event. It will kill nearly all life on Earth. The world reacts with immediate and total panic. Highways flood with people trying to flee cities. Stores are looted. Emergency broadcasts fill every screen and speaker. Law enforcement struggles to maintain order in a civilization that is beginning to understand it may not have a future. And then John's phone buzzes. It is not just another emergency alert. It is a presidential notification, a message sent only to a specific and carefully selected group of people. The message informs John that his family has been pre-selected for emergency government sheltering. They are instructed to pack essential supplies and drive immediately to Robins Air Force Base, where they will be transported to a place of safety. The notification is brief, official, and astonishing. Out of the enormous population of the surrounding area, the Garrity family has somehow been chosen. John and Allison process this information in stunned silence for only a moment before snapping into action. There is no time to question it, no time to wonder why them and not their neighbors, no time to think about anything except moving. They pack what they can, they load Nathan into the car, and they drive. The Air Base hope crushed in an instant. The drive to Robins Air Force Base is its own kind of nightmare. The roads are already choked with desperate people, many of whom do not have the government notification that the Garrity family carries. There is confusion, there is fear, and there is the creeping, awful awareness that most of the people on these roads have nowhere specific to go. They are just running. When the Garrity family arrives at the base, the scene is overwhelming. Military personnel are stationed everywhere, attempting to manage enormous crowds of people who have either received the notification or are trying to push their way in without one. The contrast between those who have been selected and those who have not is stark and deeply uncomfortable. Families who have not received the notification are being turned away, held back by fences and soldiers, their desperation visible on every face. The Garritys make their way through the processing lines. They show their notification. They are directed toward an aircraft. For a brief and beautiful moment, it seems like everything is going to be okay. They are going to make it. They have been chosen, they have arrived in time, and they are about to board a plane that will take them to safety. And then the worst thing happens. During the processing, a soldier notices Nathan's medical bracelet. They ask about it. John explains that Nathan is diabetic and requires regular insulin injections. The soldier steps aside to consult with someone else, and when he returns, his expression carries the weight of a terrible decision. Because of Nathan's medical condition and the resources and supplies required to keep a diabetic child alive in a long-term underground survival situation, Nathan is being denied access to the aircraft. And because Nathan cannot board, either can the rest of the family. John and Allison are devastated. They argue, they plead, they cannot believe what is happening. The military personnel are not cruel about it, but they are unmovable. The decision has been made, and there is nothing to be done. The Garritys are removed from the boarding area, stripped of their notification status, and pushed back into the chaos outside. In the confusion and the crush of the crowd, John and Allison become separated. Allison has Nathan. John cannot find them. People are pushing in every direction. And just like that, in the span of a few desperate minutes, a family that had a guaranteed path to survival is now completely on their own, separated from each other, surrounded by a panicking world, with no plan and no destination. Allison and Nathan the road to her parents. Allison, unable to find John in the chaos and with night falling and fragments of the comet continuing to strike the Earth in distant locations, makes the decision that she needs to get Nathan somewhere safe. She drives to the home of her father, Dale, and her mother. Dale is a steady, warm, and quietly strong older man who loves his daughter and grandson deeply. He and his wife open their home without hesitation, and for a short time, Allison and Nathan have a roof over their heads and people who love them around them. But the situation does not remain calm for long. The news from outside is growing worse by the hour. More comet fragments are striking the Earth. The sky is periodically lit with distant explosions. Emergency broadcasts have begun advising people to shelter in place, to stay indoors, and to prepare for what is coming. And then the situation inside the house becomes dangerous in a way that is entirely human rather than cosmological. The neighbors have heard that the Garrity family received a government notification. Word has spread, and desperation has made people dangerous. A couple who are neighbors of Dale, named the Ventos, approach Allison. At first they seem to be reaching out in friendship and solidarity. But it quickly becomes clear that their intentions are not benign. They know that Nathan has a government-issued wristband, a physical marker of his pre-selection status. And they want to use that wristband, along with Nathan and Allison as leverage, to get themselves access to whatever safe shelter still exists. What follows is one of the most disturbing and emotionally charged sequences in the film. Allison and Nathan are essentially taken captive by this couple. The Ventos are not cartoon villains. They are terrified people who have concluded that the only way to save themselves is to exploit someone else. But their actions are still deeply wrong, and the danger they represent to Allison and Nathan is absolutely real. Allison, resourceful and fierce in the way that mothers become when their children are threatened, manages to eventually escape with Nathan. But the encounter leaves a deep mark on both the character and the audience. It is a reminder that in a world without law, without order, and without hope, ordinary people are capable of terrible things. John the road north. Meanwhile, John is navigating his own terrifying journey. Separated from his family, without a clear destination, and in the middle of a country that is falling apart, he does what he has to do. He finds other people who are moving, who are trying to survive, and he attaches himself to them, picking up information as he goes. The most important piece of information he receives is from a fellow survivor named Colin, who John meets while hitchhiking on a truck heading north. Colin tells John that there is a route to safety that does not require military transport. Private planes, Colin explains, are flying out of Osgood, Ontario, in Canada, and those planes are heading to Greenland, where the government bunkers are located. It is not a guaranteed ticket, but it is the best lead John has, and he commits to it entirely. The journey north is grueling. John has to navigate roads that are increasingly dangerous. People are desperate. Some are kind, offering whatever help they can. Others are unpredictable and threatening. John witnesses the full spectrum of human behavior, from extraordinary selflessness to shocking cruelty, and it changes him. He is not just a man trying to reach Canada. He is a man learning, in real time, what human beings are truly made of when all the comfortable structures of civilization are stripped away. Throughout his journey north, John is desperately trying to reach Allison by phone. The communication networks are strained and often down, but he gets fragments of information through, and she gets fragments back to him, and through these broken connections they are able to begin coordinating their paths toward each other, and ultimately toward Canada. There is a particularly harrowing sequence during John's journey where he encounters a group of people who try to take his vehicle by force, and the raw physical danger of that confrontation drives home how completely the world has changed. The rule of law is gone. There are no police coming. There is no one to call for help. Every individual and every family is entirely on their own, relying on whatever strength and resourcefulness they can summon. Reunion and the final push. After what feels like an eternity of separation, John and Allison manage to find each other. The reunion is not played as a triumphant, slow-motion Hollywood moment. It is raw and emotional and exhausted. Two people who love each other, who have been through hell separately, collapsing into each other's arms with a mixture of relief and terror, because they are not safe yet. Not even close. Nathan is with Allison, and the three of them are now together again. But Nathan's insulin supply is running low. This is a quiet but constant undercurrent of dread throughout the film, because the audience understands that without insulin, Nathan's life is in danger regardless of whether the comet destroys the world or not. Finding insulin becomes almost as urgent as finding transport to Greenland. In a moment of unexpected grace, a stranger helps them locate insulin from an abandoned pharmacy or medical facility, and this small act of kindness in the middle of an apocalypse is one of the film's most quietly affecting scenes. It is a reminder that even as the worst of humanity is on full display, the best of humanity refuses to disappear entirely. With Nathan's medical needs addressed, at least temporarily, the family continues their journey toward Canada and the private airfield at Osgood, Ontario. The closer they get to Canada, the more desperate the crowds become. Everyone has heard about the planes. Everyone is trying to get there. The roads are becoming impassable in places, and the clock is ticking loudly, because the final massive fragment of Comet Clark is approaching fast. The flight to Greenland. When the Gerard family finally reaches the area near Osgood, what they find is not an orderly evacuation point. It is a scene of barely controlled desperation. Small planes, private aircraft of various kinds, are taking off and landing in whatever spaces are available. People are bargaining, begging, and in some cases fighting for a seat on any aircraft heading toward Greenland. The family fights their way into this chaos, and through a combination of determination, courage, and the help of a few good people who still retain their humanity in the middle of the apocalypse, they secure passage on a small aircraft. The plane is tiny, crowded, and flying through increasingly turbulent skies as comet fragments continue to strike the Earth. And then, in the sky, they see it. The final fragment. The enormous, planet-killing piece of Comet Clark that scientists have been warning about. It is entering the atmosphere, and the sight of it is unlike anything the characters or the audience has ever witnessed. It is a wall of fire and destruction on a scale that defies comprehension. The impact, when it comes, is cataclysmic. The shockwave races across the surface of the Earth. Cities, forests, oceans, everything is affected. The world below is being remade in fire and ash. But the plane carrying the Gerard family is heading north, heading fast, and heading underground. The bunkers beneath Greenland. The aircraft reaches Greenland and descends toward the military installation. The bunkers beneath the island are vast and deep, carved out of the rock to survive exactly this kind of catastrophic event. Inside, thousands of selected survivors from around the world have gathered, a cross-section of humanity that has been deemed, by government algorithms and emergency planning committees, to represent the best hope for rebuilding civilization. John, Allison, and Nathan make it inside. The doors seal. The world above is devastated. The film does not linger excessively in the bunkers. It does not try to tell the story of what life underground is like, or show us the politics and conflicts that would inevitably arise among thousands of terrified survivors locked together in a finite space. Instead, it moves forward. The ending emerging into a new world. After what is implied to be several days underground, the bunker doors open. The survivors begin to emerge, carefully and tentatively, into a world that is unrecognizable. The sky is gray and thick with ash. The landscape is covered in dust and debris. The familiar green and blue world they knew is gone, replaced by a desolate and silent expanse that stretches to every horizon. It is bleak. It is heartbreaking. But the people emerging from the bunkers are alive, and they are together. John and Allison stand side by side, and Nathan is between them, and the fractured marriage that defined the beginning of the film seems, in this moment, to have been healed by everything they have survived. The estrangement, the arguments, the emotional distance, all of it has been burned away by the fire of what they have been through together and separately. As the survivors gather outside, someone turns on a radio. A faint but clear signal comes through. It is a message from another group of survivors somewhere in Europe. The message is simple and profound. There are other people out there. Other bunkers have opened. Other survivors are emerging. Humanity, battered and diminished but not destroyed, is still here. The film closes on the Garrity family looking out at this gray and ruined world with something remarkable on their faces. Not despair. Not defeat. But quiet, fierce, exhausted hope. The world has ended. And the world is beginning again. The deeper meaning of the story. The story of Greenland is, at its heart, not really about a comet. The comet is the stage on which a much more intimate and universal story is told. It is a story about what a marriage truly means when everything else is stripped away. It is a story about the instinct of parenthood and the lengths to which a parent will go to protect a child. It is a story about the stranger who helps you when they have no reason to, and the neighbor who betrays you when you least expect it. It is a story about how governments make impossible decisions in impossible circumstances, and about the moral weight of being chosen to survive when billions of others are not. The film asks its audience a question that lingers long after the credits roll. If you knew the world was ending, if you had 48 hours, what would you discover about yourself? What would you do for the people you love? And in those final desperate hours, would you be one of the people who helps a stranger, or one of the people who turns away? Greenland does not preach. It does not lecture. It simply places an ordinary family in an extraordinary situation and watches, with unflinching and compassionate honesty, what happens next. And what happens is something truly worth watching. Here is the complete and detailed life history of the main actors of Greenland, 2020. Gerard Butler, the man behind John Garrity. Gerard James Butler was born on November 13, 1969, in Paisley, Scotland, a town located near Glasgow in the west-central lowlands of Scotland. His early life was far from easy, and the struggles he faced as a child and young man would go on to shape the intensity and depth that he brings to every role he plays on screen. His parents were Edward Butler and Margaret Butler, and from the very beginning, Gerard's childhood was marked by instability. His father and mother separated when Gerard was just a baby, barely a year old, and his father left the family. This early absence of a father figure left a significant mark on Gerard, and it is something he has spoken about openly in interviews over the years. Growing up without his father created a sense of longing and a hunger to prove himself that drove much of his early ambition. After his parents separated, his mother took him and his siblings and moved to Montreal, Canada, for a period of time. The family eventually returned to Scotland, settling back in the Paisley area, where Gerard grew up and attended school. Life was not luxurious. The family did not have a great deal of money, and Gerard experienced the particular kind of working-class Scottish upbringing that builds toughness and resilience whether you want it to or not. As a young boy, Gerard was not the obvious candidate for a future in Hollywood. He was not performing in school plays or dreaming of movie sets. He was a reasonably normal Scottish kid growing up in a post-industrial town, navigating the challenges of adolescence without the guidance of a father at home. However, he was always someone who felt things deeply and who had an expressive, passionate nature that would eventually find its outlet in acting. He pursued his education seriously and went on to study law at the University of Glasgow, one of Scotland's most prestigious universities. He was a capable student, and by all accounts he was heading toward a conventional professional career as a lawyer. He became the president of the Glasgow University Law Society, which was a position of genuine responsibility and prestige among his peers. It looked very much like Gerard Butler was going to spend his life in courtrooms rather than in front of cameras. But life had other plans. During his time at university, and in the period immediately following his graduation, Gerard began to feel increasingly restless. The pull towards something more creative, more expressive, and more alive was growing stronger. He had always been drawn to storytelling and performance in some deep and instinctive way, even if he had never fully acted on it. His path toward acting began in an almost accidental way. He started to explore theater and performance after leaving university, and it quickly became clear to him and to everyone around him that he had a natural and powerful presence in front of an audience. There was something about the way Gerard inhabited a character, the raw physicality and emotional immediacy he brought to the stage, that set him apart from the beginning. However, the transition from aspiring actor to working professional was not smooth or quick. Gerard faced a long and difficult period of rejection, struggle, and financial hardship before he began to find any real footing in the industry. He moved to London to pursue his acting career more seriously, and those early years in London were genuinely tough. He was living with very little money, going to auditions that led nowhere, and questioning whether he had made a terrible mistake in abandoning a stable legal career for the uncertainty of acting. During this period, Gerard also struggled with alcohol. He has been honest in interviews about the fact that he went through a period where drinking became a problem, something he used to cope with the stress, the rejection, and the loneliness of those early years. It is a part of his story that he does not hide, and it is also a part of his story that he eventually overcame, which speaks to the same determination and resilience that defines so many of the characters he has played. His first real break came when he caught the attention of Scottish actor and filmmaker Stephen Burkoff, who cast him in a stage production. This led to other opportunities, and gradually, painfully slowly at first, Gerard began to build a presence in the British entertainment industry. He appeared in small television roles and minor film parts throughout the late 1990s, doing the kind of work that most people never see but that builds the foundation of a career. One of his earliest film appearances was in the 1997 James Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies, where he had a very small and largely uncredited role. It was nothing more than a footnote at the time, but it put him in a room with major filmmakers and showed him the scale of what was possible. His first genuinely notable role came in 2000 when he was cast as the iconic vampire Dracula in the film Dracula 2000. It was not a critically acclaimed film, but it gave Gerard a leading role in a major studio production and put his face in front of a global audience for the first time. Directors and casting agents began to take notice of this intense, physically commanding Scottish actor who could carry a film. More roles followed through the early 2000s, each one building his profile a little more. He appeared in films like Reign of Fire and Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life, taking on supporting and secondary roles in larger productions while simultaneously proving himself in smaller, more character-driven work. But the role that changed everything, the role that transformed Gerard Butler from a working actor into a genuine global movie star, came in 2007 with the release of 300, directed by Zack Snyder. In 300, Gerard played King Leonidas of Sparta, the legendary warrior king who led 300 Spartan soldiers against the vast Persian army of Xerxes at the Battle of Thermopylae. The role required Gerard to undergo an extraordinary physical transformation. He trained for months with an intensity that bordered on obsession, building a body that looked genuinely like it belonged to an ancient warrior. The training was brutal and demanding, and Gerard has spoken about how it pushed him to his absolute physical and mental limits. 300 was a massive and unexpected global phenomenon. It grossed over $450 million worldwide against a budget of approximately $65 million, making it one of the most profitable films of 2007. Gerard's performance as Leonidas, with his ferocious physicality, his thundering voice, and his iconic delivery of lines that became cultural touchstones overnight, made him one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. The image of Gerard Butler as Leonidas, shield raised, spear in hand, screaming into the faces of an advancing army, became one of the defining images of early 21st century cinema. After 300, the film offers came flooding in, but Gerard made choices that were not always what Hollywood expected of him. Rather than simply accepting every big-budget action spectacle that came his way, he also pursued romantic comedies and more character-driven work, clearly wanting to demonstrate a range that went beyond warrior kings and action heroes. He starred in P.S. I Love You, a romantic drama in which he played a charming Irish husband who dies of a brain tumor and leaves behind a series of letters to help his grieving wife rediscover her life. It was a completely different kind of role from anything he had done before, and while the film received mixed reviews, it showed a warmth and emotional vulnerability in Gerard that surprised audiences who knew him only from 300. He went on to appear in a string of romantic comedies and lighter fare, including The Ugly Truth alongside Katherine Heigl, The Bounty Hunter with Jennifer Aniston, and Playing for Keeps. These films varied in quality and critical reception, but they cemented Gerard as a versatile leading man who could carry both action films and romantic comedies with equal ease, a combination that relatively few male actors in Hollywood can genuinely claim. He returned to the action genre with films like Machine Gun Preacher, where he played a real-life former drug dealer and criminal who becomes a Christian missionary and armed protector of orphaned children in Sudan. It was one of his most demanding and physically grueling performances, and it earned him strong reviews from critics who appreciated his commitment to the role. He also began what became an extremely popular franchise with the film Olympus Has Fallen in 2013, in which he played Secret Service agent Mike Banning, tasked with saving the President of the United States from a group of terrorists who have taken over the White House. The film was a huge commercial success and spawned two sequels, London Has Fallen and Angel Has Fallen, with Gerard reprising the role of Mike Banning in each. The franchise became one of the most reliable action series of the 2010s, consistently delivering strong box office returns and giving Gerard a recurring character that audiences genuinely loved. Throughout all of this, Gerard maintained his connection to his Scottish roots. He has spoken frequently about how much his upbringing in Scotland shaped his personality, his work ethic, and his approach to acting. He never adopted an American accent in his personal life, keeping his Scottish accent even as he became one of Hollywood's biggest stars. He has a deep loyalty to his homeland and has returned there regularly over the years. In his personal life, Gerard has remained relatively private despite his enormous public profile. He has been in several high-profile relationships over the years, but he has never married. He has spoken in interviews about his desire to eventually find the right person and settle down, but he has also been honest about the fact that the demands of his career and his personal nature have made long-term commitment challenging. He does not have children. He has been open about his ongoing commitment to sobriety following his struggles with alcohol in his younger years. He has spoken about the discipline required to maintain that sobriety, and the way it has shaped his approach to his health, his fitness, and his mental well-being. He is known in Hollywood for his extraordinary commitment to physical fitness and for the intensity with which he prepares for physically demanding roles. When Greenland came along in 2020, it represented something genuinely different for Gerard. He was not playing a warrior, not playing a Secret Service agent, not playing any kind of conventional action hero. He was playing John Garrity, an ordinary structural engineer from Atlanta, a man who is scared and exhausted and desperate, a man who makes mistakes and feels overwhelmed and cries. It was a performance that many critics and audiences considered to be among the very best of his entire career, precisely because it stripped away all the armor and showed something rawer and more human than anything he had shown before. Gerard Butler, the man who screamed "This is Sparta" into the face of ancient Persia, made audiences cry by simply being a frightened father who refuses to give up on his family. Morena Baccarin, the heart of the film. Morena Baccarin was born on June 2, 1979, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Her story is one of the most genuinely international in Hollywood, a journey that began in one of the most vibrant and complex cities in the world and eventually took her to the top levels of American film and television. Her father, Fernando Baccarin, was a journalist, and her mother, Vera Seta, was an actress in Brazil. Growing up in a household where storytelling and performance were already part of the fabric of daily life gave Morena an early and intimate exposure to the world of entertainment. Her mother's career as an actress was not simply an abstract influence. It was a living, breathing example of what a life in the performing arts looked like, with all its demands and rewards. When Morena was 10 years old, her family made the significant decision to move from Brazil to New York City in the United States. This was a major transition for a young girl, moving to a new country, learning a new language, and navigating the social landscape of an American childhood while carrying the culture and identity of Brazil inside her. The move required adaptability, courage, and a kind of quiet resilience that would serve Morena well throughout her career. She settled into American life and proved to be an exceptional student. She attended the Fiorello H. LaGuardia High School of Music and Art and Performing Arts in New York City, which is one of the most prestigious performing arts high schools in the entire United States. This is the school that inspired the film and television series Fame, and it has produced an extraordinary number of talented artists, musicians, and performers over its history. For Morena, being accepted to and attending LaGuardia was the moment her professional path became clear. She was not going to pursue any other kind of career. She was going to be an actress. After completing high school, she went on to study acting at the Juilliard School, also in New York City. Juilliard is arguably the most respected performing arts conservatory in America and one of the most demanding and competitive in the entire world. The program accepts only a tiny number of students each year, and it puts those students through a rigorous and intensive training process that covers every aspect of performance, from classical theater and Shakespeare to movement, voice, and contemporary dramatic technique. Graduating from Juilliard is a mark of genuine distinction in the performing arts world, and it gave Morena a technical foundation that would underpin everything she would go on to do professionally. After completing her training at Juilliard, Morena began pursuing work as an actress in New York, doing the kind of theater and small screen work that most young actors do when they are just starting out. The early years were characterized by the usual mixture of hope, hard work, and patience that the industry requires of anyone trying to build a career. She was clearly talented, and her striking looks, dark hair, large expressive eyes, and a quality of intelligent calm that came through in every performance, made her memorable to anyone who worked with her. Her first major breakthrough came in 2002 when she was cast in the science fiction television series Firefly, created by Joss Whedon for the Fox network. Firefly was a deeply unconventional show, a science fiction western set in the future, following the crew of a small spaceship as they navigated a dangerous and morally complex universe. The show had an eclectic and brilliantly drawn ensemble cast, and Morena played Inara Serra, a companion, which in the world of the show is a highly trained and socially respected courtesan. Inara was a character of great dignity, intelligence, and complexity, and Morena brought all of those qualities to the role with effortless grace. Firefly was cancelled by Fox after only one season, a decision that infuriated its devoted fan base and remains one of the most controversial cancellation decisions in American television history. However, the show's passionate and loyal following kept it alive in the cultural conversation long after it left the air, and its reputation has only grown over the decades since its cancellation. For Morena, the role of Inara introduced her to a massive and deeply appreciative global audience, and it established her as one of the most compelling presences in American genre television. The story of Firefly did not end with the television cancellation. The fan response was so overwhelming that Universal Pictures agreed to fund a theatrical film that would continue and conclude some of the show's storylines. The film, titled Serenity and released in 2005, brought the entire cast of Firefly back together, including Morena. While the film did not achieve blockbuster success at the box office, it was critically appreciated and deeply meaningful to the show's fans, and it gave the cast and crew a sense of closure that the abrupt cancellation had denied them. Following Firefly and Serenity, Morena continued to build her career in both film and television. She appeared in a number of projects throughout the mid-2000s, developing her range and establishing herself as a reliable and talented actress who could handle a wide variety of material. Her next major television role came in 2011 when she was cast in Homeland, the critically acclaimed political thriller produced by Showtime. Homeland starred Claire Danes as a CIA officer and Damian Lewis as Nicholas Brody, a Marine sergeant who returns home after years of captivity and is suspected of having been turned into a terrorist asset. Morena played Jessica Brody, Nicholas Brody's wife, a woman navigating the incredibly difficult and emotionally complex territory of having her husband return after years of absence, changed in ways she cannot fully understand. The role required Morena to portray a woman caught between love, confusion, betrayal, and loyalty, and she handled all of those emotional currents with tremendous skill. Homeland became one of the most talked about television shows of its era, winning multiple Emmy Awards and Golden Globe Awards, and Morena's work on the show significantly raised her profile in the industry. While working on Homeland, she was also beginning to build her film career more seriously. She appeared in the 2013 Marvel film Thor: The Dark World in a supporting role, and she took on the role of Vanessa in Deadpool in 2016, the irreverent and wildly successful superhero film starring Ryan Reynolds. The Deadpool franchise became one of the biggest in Hollywood history, and while Morena's role as Vanessa was primarily a supporting one, the film's enormous success and cultural impact meant that her face and her work reached an even larger global audience. In her personal life, Morena has experienced both joy and considerable difficulty. She was married to actor and director Austin Chick, and the couple had a son together named Julius before their relationship ended in divorce. The divorce proceedings were complicated and at times contentious, taking place partly in the public eye. During this difficult period, Morena began a relationship with actor Ben McKenzie, whom she had met while working together. The two eventually married and have children together, and by all accounts the relationship has been a deeply positive and stabilizing one in her life. The journey from Rio de Janeiro to Juilliard to Hollywood is one that required not just talent but genuine resilience, adaptability, and an unwillingness to be defined by the obstacles placed in her path. Morena Baccarin is, in every sense, someone who built her career through the quality of her work, and Greenland gave her one of the most demanding and emotionally complete roles of her entire filmography. Scott Glenn: A Lifetime of Craft. Scott Glenn was born on January 26, 1941, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He is one of those actors whose career spans so many decades and so many different eras of American cinema that simply listing his credits tells the story of Hollywood itself across the better part of a century. Growing up in Pittsburgh in the 1940s and 1950s, Scott had a childhood shaped by the working class, industrial culture of Western Pennsylvania. He was not a child who dreamed of movie stardom. He was a young man shaped by a particular American toughness, the kind that comes from a post-war, blue-collar environment where hard work and stoic resilience are simply the expected way of being in the world. He attended William and Mary College in Virginia, and after completing his education he served in the United States Marine Corps. His military service was genuinely formative. The discipline, the physical demands, and the psychological rigors of life as a Marine gave Scott a bearing and a quality of quiet authority that would define his screen presence for his entire career. When Scott Glenn looks at you from a movie screen, you believe him, and a significant part of the reason is that the seriousness and the competence in his eyes are not manufactured. They come from a real experience of demanding and consequential service. After leaving the Marines, Scott pursued journalism for a brief period before the pull toward acting became too strong to ignore. He moved to New York and began studying acting seriously, immersing himself in the craft with the same intensity he had brought to his military service. He studied with the legendary acting teacher Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio, learning the method approach to performance that had shaped an entire generation of American actors including Marlon Brando, James Dean, Al Pacino, and Robert De Niro. The Actors Studio was not just a school. It was a community of serious, committed artists, and being part of that community shaped Scott's entire approach to his work. He began his professional career in theater in New York, doing the kind of rigorous stage work that builds genuine technical skill and emotional depth. The New York theater world of the 1960s and early 1970s was a demanding and competitive environment, and Scott thrived in it, developing into an actor of real power and subtlety. His film career began in the early 1970s with small roles, and he built gradually through the decade, taking on a variety of projects across different genres. One of his early notable film appearances was in Nashville in 1975, the landmark Robert Altman ensemble film that wove together dozens of characters in a complex tapestry of American life and culture. Being part of an Altman film at that stage of his career put Scott in the company of one of the greatest American directors of the era, and the experience clearly influenced his thinking about acting and storytelling. Throughout the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Scott continued to build his filmography with a combination of commercial productions and more independent, character-driven work. He appeared in Urban Cowboy in 1980, the John Travolta film about Texas honky-tonk culture, and his performance there added another dimension to his growing reputation as a versatile and dependable character actor. But the role that truly announced Scott Glenn to a global mainstream audience came in 1983 with The Right Stuff, Philip Kaufman's epic and celebrated film about the early American space program and the pilots who became the first American astronauts. Scott played Alan Shepard, the first American to travel to space. It was a role of real historical weight, and Scott brought both the physical authority and the complex inner life of Shepard to the screen with tremendous conviction. The Right Stuff was a critical sensation, nominated for multiple Academy Awards, and Scott's performance in it remains one of the most memorable of his career. The following years saw Scott take on an extraordinary range of roles across a remarkable variety of films. He appeared in The Keep in 1983, Silverado in 1985 where he played one of the lead cowboys in Lawrence Kasdan's beloved Western ensemble, and The River in 1984. Each of these films showed a different facet of Scott's range, from action and adventure to drama and historical epic. One of the most significant roles of his career came in 1991 with The Silence of the Lambs, Jonathan Demme's masterpiece thriller based on the Thomas Harris novel. Scott played Jack Crawford, the senior FBI agent at the Behavioral Science Unit who recruits Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster, to help profile serial killers including the terrifying Hannibal Lecter. The film won 5 Academy Awards including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Actor, and Best Adapted Screenplay, making it one of the most decorated films in Oscar history. Scott's performance as Crawford was essential to the film's emotional and procedural architecture, providing the quiet authority and moral complexity that grounded the story. He continued working steadily through the 1990s and 2000s, appearing in films like Backdraft, Courage Under Fire, and Vertical Limit, as well as significant television work. He appeared in the Western television drama series The Virgin River and took on the role of Stick in the Marvel Netflix series Daredevil, playing the blind mentor to Matt Murdock. His performance in Daredevil introduced him to an entirely new generation of fans who knew his legacy but had grown up watching superhero content rather than the classic films of his earlier career. Scott Glenn is, in every meaningful sense, a craftsman of the highest order. He has never been the biggest star in any film he has appeared in, but he has never given a performance that was less than fully committed and completely authentic. In Greenland, he brought exactly that quality to the role of Dale, Allison's father. It is a relatively small role in terms of screen time, but Scott makes every moment count, bringing a lifetime of skill and genuine human warmth to a character who represents safety, love, and family in a story where those things are increasingly rare. David Denman from Scranton to the Apocalypse. David Denman was born on July 25, 1973, in San Diego, California. He is best known to a generation of television viewers as Jim Halpert's perpetual nemesis and the put-upon warehouse supervisor turned paper salesman Ryan in The Office. But that description does not begin to capture the depth and range of an actor who has been working seriously in film and television for decades. Growing up in San Diego in the 1970s and 1980s, David had a relatively typical Southern California childhood. He developed an interest in performing from an early age and pursued it seriously enough to make it his professional focus after completing his education. He attended California State University, and from there he pursued acting through the usual combination of stage work, auditions, and small screen appearances that constitute the early years of most working actors' careers. Before finding his way to The Office, David did years of work in theater and in small film and television roles, building the technical foundation and the professional discipline that serious acting requires. He was not an overnight success story. He was someone who worked at the craft consistently and patiently until the right opportunity arrived. That opportunity arrived in 2005 when the American version of The Office premiered on NBC. The show, adapted from Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant's celebrated British series, was set in the Scranton, Pennsylvania branch of a paper company called Dunder Mifflin, and it followed the daily lives of the office workers there through the documentary format that the British original had pioneered. David was cast as Dwight Schrute, the beat-farming, authority-worshipping, relentlessly earnest assistant to the regional manager. Dwight was a character of extraordinary comic invention, simultaneously ridiculous and strangely admirable, and David brought him to life with a commitment and a specificity that made Dwight one of the most beloved comic characters in American television history. The Office ran for 9 seasons and became one of the most watched and most quoted television comedies of the 21st century. It made household names of its entire cast, including Steve Carell, John Krasinski, Jenna Fischer, Ed Helms, and of course David Denman himself. Dwight Schrute became a cultural icon, his particular brand of rigid, rules-obsessed, beat-farming intensity inspiring endless imitation and affection from fans around the world. For David, the success of The Office was both a tremendous gift and a potential trap. Playing a beloved comic character for 9 years creates a deep association in the public mind, and breaking out of that association to be taken seriously in dramatic roles is a challenge that many sitcom actors face, and not all of them overcome. David was determined to demonstrate his range beyond Dwight Schrute, and he pursued dramatic and independent film work throughout the run of The Office and after it ended. In Greenland, David plays Ralph Vento, the neighbor of the Garrity family, and his character represents something genuinely disturbing and morally complex. Ralph is not a villain in the traditional sense. He is a frightened human being making terrible choices under extreme pressure. The performance David brings to this role is understated and effective, drawing on a quieter and more unsettling register than the broad comedy of Dwight Schrute, while showing that the same actor can operate in completely different emotional territory with equal skill. David Denman is an actor whose personal life has been generally kept private, though it is known that he has been involved in various philanthropic and environmental causes over the years. He has continued to work in both film and television since the conclusion of The Office, demonstrating through each new project that his talent extends well beyond the character that made him famous. The budget: how much it cost to end the world. One of the most fascinating and genuinely impressive things about Greenland is the relationship between what the film cost to make and what it ultimately delivered on screen. When you watch Greenland and you see entire cities being obliterated by comet fragments, when you see the sky torn open by fire, and the earth itself shaking under the weight of cosmic destruction, you would be forgiven for assuming that the film cost hundreds of millions of dollars to produce. The reality is considerably more surprising and considerably more instructive about the nature of smart filmmaking. Greenland was made on a production budget of approximately $34 to $35 million. In the context of modern Hollywood disaster filmmaking, this is a remarkably modest figure. To put it in perspective, a single film in the Transformers franchise can cost upwards of $200 million. The 2012 disaster film starring John Cusack cost around $200 million. Roland Emmerich's The Day After Tomorrow, which Greenland is frequently compared to, cost approximately $125 million. Even some relatively contained superhero films cost more than 3 times what Greenland cost to produce. The fact that director Rick Roman Waugh and his team managed to create a film that feels genuinely epic in scope while working with a fraction of the budget that most comparable productions would require is a testament to a very specific set of filmmaking priorities and disciplines that shaped every decision made during the production. The first and most important of those priorities was the decision, made very early in the development process, to keep the camera focused on the human story rather than the disaster spectacle. This was not purely a creative decision, although it was absolutely the right creative decision. It was also a practical and financial one. Every time a director chooses to show the audience the comet hitting a city from a wide aerial perspective with thousands of digital extras and burning buildings and collapsing infrastructure, they are spending enormous amounts of money on visual effects that exist purely for spectacle. Every time a director chooses instead to show the audience that same disaster through the eyes of one terrified family watching it from a car window or a roadside, they are achieving something more emotionally powerful at a fraction of the cost. Rick Roman Waugh made this choice consistently and deliberately throughout the production. The comet impacts in Greenland are not shown in the way that Roland Emmerich would show them. You do not see extended sequences of famous landmarks being destroyed. You do not follow multiple groups of digital characters through waves of destruction. And you do not spend 20 minutes watching a wall of water consume Manhattan. Instead, you see the flash in the sky, you feel the shockwave, you see the terror on the faces of real human beings. And your imagination does the rest. And what your imagination produces is almost always more frightening and more affecting than anything a visual effects team can build. The visual effects budget for Greenland was therefore significantly smaller than what a comparable disaster film would typically spend, yet the effects that were created were used so strategically and so effectively that they carry enormous weight. The team prioritized quality over quantity, focusing their resources on a small number of key visual moments and executing those moments with real skill rather than spreading a limited budget thinly across dozens of mediocre effects sequences. The casting of the film also reflected a smart budgetary strategy. Gerard Butler is a genuine movie star with significant box office drawing power, and securing him as the lead required a meaningful percentage of the production budget. But the rest of the cast, while uniformly excellent, was not assembled from the ranks of the highest-paid performers in Hollywood. Morena Baccarin, Scott Glenn, David Denman, and Roger Dale Floyd are all talented and experienced professionals who command respectable fees, but none of them carry the kind of astronomical salary demands that assembling a more conventionally star-studded cast would have required. The decision to shoot the film primarily in the United States, specifically in and around the Atlanta, Georgia area, was another significant financial factor. Georgia has become one of the most popular production destinations in the United States in large part because of very generous tax incentives that the state offers to film productions. These incentives can reduce the effective cost of a production by a substantial percentage, and Greenland took full advantage of them. Shooting in Georgia rather than in more expensive production centers like Los Angeles or New York, and rather than shipping the entire production to international locations for the sake of visual variety, allowed the budget to be stretched considerably further than it might otherwise have gone. The location work in and around Atlanta, Conyers, and other Georgia locations gave the film a very specific and recognizable quality of American ordinariness that was actually essential to the story. The neighborhoods, the roads, the strip malls, the big box stores, the interstate highways, all of the visual texture of everyday American suburban life that appears in the early parts of the film, grounds the story in a reality that makes what follows feel genuinely apocalyptic rather than abstractly catastrophic. And the fact that this visual grounding was achieved by simply filming in the actual environment rather than constructing expensive sets or traveling to specially chosen locations made it both cheaper and more authentic. The production companies involved in financing Greenland were ST's Films, Anton, Thunder Road, G-Base, and Riverstone Pictures, a combination of American and international financing partners that allowed the total production cost to be shared and the financial risk to be distributed. ST's Films, which handled domestic distribution, was a mid-sized studio that had built its identity around the kind of commercially minded but creatively serious mid-budget filmmaking that Greenland represented perfectly. They were expert at making films that delivered genuine entertainment value without the bloated budgets that the major studios had come to regard as unavoidable for films of this scale. The marketing budget was estimated at approximately $10 million for the domestic American market alone, which is significant but again modest by Hollywood standards. The studio invested in a campaign that highlighted the emotional and human elements of the story while also delivering enough spectacle in the trailers and promotional materials to signal that this was a genuine event film worthy of the disaster genre classification. The marketing campaign was effective enough that the film generated substantial interest and conversation even before its release, despite the disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. When all was said and done, Greenland grossed approximately $52.3 million worldwide against its $34 to $35 million production budget, making it a genuine financial success, particularly given the extraordinary circumstances of its release during a global pandemic that had closed most of the world's cinemas. The video-on-demand release in the United States also generated significant revenue that is harder to track precisely, but that was reported to be very strong, with ST's Films describing the VOD performance as a major success. The subsequent sale of streaming rights to HBO for an estimated $20 to $30 million added further to the film's financial performance, ultimately making it one of the more profitable mid-budget films of 2020. The lesson of Greenland's budget story is one that Hollywood occasionally needs to be reminded of. You do not need $200 million to make a disaster film that moves people. You need a smart script, a committed director, talented actors, and the discipline to spend your resources where they will have the most emotional impact rather than the most visual spectacle. The making of Greenland: how the film came together. The story of how Greenland was made is in many ways as compelling as the story told within the film itself, because it involved a creative team that had very clear and specific ideas about what kind of film they wanted to make and who executed those ideas with a consistency of vision that is not always easy to maintain across the long and complicated process of bringing a major film to the screen. The screenplay was written by Chris Sparling, an American screenwriter who had previously written the script for Buried, the 2010 Ryan Reynolds thriller in which Reynolds plays a man who wakes up buried alive in a coffin in Iraq with only a cell phone and a lighter. Buried is a film of extreme narrative constraint, essentially a one-location, one-character thriller that works entirely on the basis of its writing and its lead performance. The fact that Sparling had succeeded brilliantly with that kind of constrained, human-centered storytelling made him an interesting choice for a disaster film, because his instinct was always going to be to look for the intimate human story within the large-scale event rather than to let the spectacle overwhelm the characters. Sparling's script for Greenland made several deliberate and important choices that distinguished it from the conventions of the disaster genre. Most disaster films follow multiple groups of characters, cutting between different locations and different storylines to create a sense of global scale. Greenland follows only one family, and the camera never leaves them for any significant period. Most disaster films include extensive sequences in government war rooms, scientific facilities, and military command centers, where authoritative characters explain what is happening and what is being done about it. Greenland contains almost none of this. The audience learns what is happening at exactly the same pace and through exactly the same channels as the Garrity family, which means they are just as confused, just as scared, and just as in the dark as the people they are watching. Most disaster films also include a resolution in which the disaster is somehow averted or significantly mitigated by the heroic actions of the protagonists. Greenland does not do this. The comet is not stopped. The world is not saved in the conventional sense. The Garrity family survives, but they survive by getting out of the way of something that cannot be stopped, not by stopping it. This is a fundamentally different emotional and narrative posture from the standard disaster film, and it produces a fundamentally different kind of film. Director Rick Roman came to Greenland from a background primarily in crime thrillers. He had directed Snitch in 2013, which starred Dwayne Johnson as a father who works undercover for the DA to reduce his son's prison sentence, and Shot Caller in 2017, a brutal and serious crime drama about a man who is gradually transformed by the prison system into someone unrecognizable from the person he was before. These are not the obvious credits of a disaster film director, but they reveal exactly why Waugh was the right choice for Greenland, because his instinct in both of those films was always to use the genre framework as a container for serious exploration of how ordinary people are changed by extraordinary circumstances. Waugh and Gerard Butler had worked together on Angel Has Fallen in 2019, the third film in the Olympus Has Fallen franchise, and the professional relationship and mutual respect they had developed during that collaboration was one of the reasons Gerard signed on to Greenland with such enthusiasm. He trusted Waugh completely, and that trust gave him the confidence to be genuinely vulnerable in ways he had not been asked to be in his previous work with the director. Principal photography began in May 2019, with the production based primarily in Georgia. The shoot involved significant logistical challenges, as the script required large crowd scenes, complex action sequences, and the kind of practical effects work that disaster filmmaking demands even when the primary approach is to minimize spectacle in favor of character. The scenes at Robins Air Force Base, where the Garrity family attempts to board the military aircraft and Nathan is turned away, were among the most logistically demanding of the entire production. These scenes required hundreds of extras playing desperate families trying to get through military checkpoints, military personnel maintaining an increasingly fragile order, and a physical chaos of a space that was designed for organized evacuation being overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis. Coordinating that many people in a believable and emotionally authentic way while also maintaining the focus on the Garrity family within the crowd required careful planning and a great deal of practical improvisation on the day of filming. The highway sequences, showing roads packed with people trying to flee, were created through a combination of large-scale practical elements and visual effects enhancement. The production team worked with Georgia's transportation authorities to close sections of road and fill them with vehicles and extras, and the visual effects team then extended and enhanced these practical elements in post-production to create the sense of truly infinite gridlock that the script required. The visual effects work was divided between several companies, with the main team working to create the comet impact sequences that punctuate the film. The approach taken was deliberately restrained and grounded in scientific plausibility, because Waugh and the effects supervisors wanted the impacts to feel like something that could actually happen rather than like the exaggerated spectacles of more conventionally Hollywood disaster films. The Tampa impact early in the film, for example, is not shown directly. You see the sky light up and you see the shockwave expanding outward, and the decision to withhold the direct image of the destruction is both more frightening and more scientifically accurate than a direct shot would have been. Gerard Butler threw himself into the physical demands of the role with the same total commitment he had brought to his preparation for 300, though in a very different direction. Where 300 required him to build the body of a warrior, Greenland required him to embody an ordinary man pushed far beyond his physical and emotional limits. The character of John Garrity is frequently exhausted, frequently scared, and frequently operating on the edge of his capabilities, and Gerard worked with Waugh to find the physical language of that exhaustion and fear, the way a non-action hero carries himself when he is running from something rather than toward it. The work between Gerard and young Roger Dale Floyd was given particular attention during the production. Waugh understood that the relationship between John and Nathan was the emotional engine of the entire film, and he invested real time and creative energy in creating the conditions under which a genuine bond between the two actors could develop. He gave them time together outside of formal rehearsals, encouraged them to simply spend time in each other's company, and approached the scenes between them with a patience and a sensitivity that allowed Roger to feel completely safe and completely free to bring his natural emotional responses to whatever the scene required. Morena Baccarin has spoken in interviews about the particular challenge of playing a character who is separated from the other two leads for a significant portion of the film, carrying her own storyline and her own emotional arc without the support of the chemistry she had developed with her co-stars. The sequences where Allison is trying to get Nathan to safety on her own, and particularly the sequences involving the terrifying situation with the neighbors who take them captive, required Morena to sustain a high level of emotional intensity across multiple days of filming without the grounding that working with Gerard would have provided. The production moved quickly, as mid-budget productions must, and the discipline of working within a tight schedule and a controlled budget actually served the film well in some unexpected ways. There was not the luxury of endless takes and extended experimentation that enormous budgets sometimes produce, and that can paradoxically lead to a kind of creative paralysis. Everyone on set knew what they were there to do, they knew what the film needed, and they worked with a focus and a purpose that gave the production a clarity and an energy that carried through into the finished film. Post-production involved significant work on the visual effects sequences, the editing of what was a complex narrative with multiple parallel storylines, and the development of the film's sound design and score. The score, composed by David Buckley, was designed to underscore the emotional journey of the family rather than the spectacle of the disaster, which was entirely consistent with the film's broader priorities. The music does not tell you when to be scared by the comet. It tells you when to be scared for the family, and that distinction makes all the difference. Funny moments on set, laughter at the end of the world. Now, this is the part of the video that perhaps surprises people most when they first encounter it, because Greenland is not a film that feels, from the outside, like a particularly fun or light-hearted production to have been part of. It is a serious, emotionally intense, and often genuinely frightening film about the end of the world, and the mood on set during many of the most demanding sequences must have been correspondingly focused and somber. But here is the truth about film sets that anyone who has ever spent time on one will tell you without hesitation. The more intense and emotionally demanding the material being filmed, the more the cast and crew need moments of laughter and levity to discharge the tension and reset their emotional state between takes. Great dramatic filmmaking is not produced in an atmosphere of constant gravity and solemnity. It is produced by human beings who take their work seriously but who also understand that laughter is not the enemy of great drama. It is, in many ways, the necessary companion to it. Gerard Butler is known throughout Hollywood as one of the most naturally funny and playful people on any set he is part of. This is something that his colleagues in film after film have commented on, the fact that the man who plays warriors and action heroes with such ferocious intensity is, in person and between takes, someone with an irrepressible sense of humor and a gift for creating a relaxed and joyful atmosphere among the people he works with. He is the kind of actor who is always on, always engaging, always finding the comic angle in whatever situation presents itself, and that quality was absolutely present throughout the production of Greenland. One of the most frequently discussed funny moments from the production involved the sequences filmed on the crowded highways and roads outside Atlanta. Hundreds of extras were involved in these scenes, all of them playing desperate refugees fleeing an apocalyptic disaster, and maintaining the right tone and the right energy across hundreds of people for extended periods of filming is always a significant challenge. During one of the breaks between setups, Gerard apparently decided that the best way to keep several hundred extras energized and engaged was to perform an impromptu comedy routine in the middle of the road, using a traffic cone as a makeshift prop and essentially doing stand-up comedy for anyone within earshot. The production team has described the spectacle of Gerard Butler, surrounded by several hundred people dressed as apocalypse survivors on a closed Georgia highway, holding a traffic cone like a microphone and making the entire assembled crowd collapse with laughter, as one of the most surreal and memorable moments of the entire shoot. The scenes at the fictional air base, which required the cast and hundreds of extras to simulate the chaos of a military evacuation point, were logistically complex and physically demanding, and they required many hours of filming across multiple days. During one of these days, in the Georgia heat which can be genuinely oppressive in late spring and early summer, the equipment used to simulate the sounds of military aircraft taking off and the general ambient noise of the location was experiencing technical difficulties, and the sound team was attempting to fix the problem while everyone else waited. Gerard, rather than standing around or retreating to his trailer, apparently decided that the appropriate response to the situation was to begin doing impressions of various Hollywood action heroes reacting to the comet disaster, pulling from his extensive personal knowledge of how different directors and different films handle these kinds of scenes and turning it into a running comedy performance for the benefit of the crew. Rick Romanois has reportedly described watching Gerard do his impression of how a Roland Emmerich film would handle the same scene, complete with Gerard performing both the heroic lead character and the panicking government officials and the dramatic scientific exposition, as one of the funniest things he had ever witnessed on a film set. Young Roger Dale Floyd, who was 9 years old during filming, brought his own kind of energy to the set that was an entirely different flavor of funny. Child actors on serious dramatic productions occupy a very specific and charming position in the social ecology of a film set, because they have not yet developed the professional armor that adult actors wear, the controlled composure and measured social presentation that comes with years of navigating the film industry. Roger was simply himself, curious and energetic and entirely unintimidated by the scale of what was happening around him, and his reactions to the various elements of the production were frequently hilarious precisely because of how genuine and unfiltered they were. There was apparently a day of filming that involved a particularly elaborate practical effects setup, with various mechanical rigs and smoke machines and wind machines all operating simultaneously to simulate the environmental chaos following a comet impact. The setup took several hours to arrange and represented a significant amount of technical and logistical complexity. When it was finally ready and the first test run happened, with all of the machines firing simultaneously and producing a genuinely impressive wall of noise and wind and artificial debris, Roger's response was apparently to turn to Gerard Butler with an expression of completely unguarded delight and shout, with total sincerity, that it was the coolest thing he had ever seen in his entire life. The spontaneity and the genuine wonder in that reaction apparently broke the entire crew up completely, because here was this child surrounded by the full apparatus of a major Hollywood production, with all of its expense and complexity and seriousness, and his response to it was simply the unconditional joy of a 9-year-old boy who had been shown something genuinely amazing. The chemistry between Gerard Butler and Morena Baccarin, which reads on screen as the chemistry of two people who have a deep and complicated shared history, was developed through a filming process that apparently involved a great deal of good-natured ribbing and mutual teasing between the two actors. Morena has a quick and dry sense of humor that complements Gerard's more boisterous comedic energy in interesting ways, and the two of them apparently developed a dynamic on set where they would find the comic potential in whatever scene they were filming before the cameras rolled, using laughter to release the tension of the emotional material and then channeling whatever remained of that energy into the performance itself. There was one particular scene between Gerard and Morena, involving a very emotionally charged conversation in a car, that reportedly required a large number of takes, not because either actor was struggling with the emotional content, but because every time they reached the end of the scene and the director called cut, one of them would say something that made the other laugh. And then the laughter would be impossible to stop for several minutes. The specific thing that kept triggering the laughter has been described by people present on set as a running joke about the logistics of the fictional government selection process, with Gerard apparently becoming increasingly committed to a very detailed and very funny improvisational theory about the exact algorithm the government would have used to decide which families got the notification and which ones did not. A theory that grew more elaborate and more absurd with each retelling, and that had Morena in tears of laughter every time he returned to it. David Denman, who plays the morally compromised neighbor Ralph Vento, brought a very specific kind of humor to the set that came from the particular awkwardness of his character's position in the story. Ralph is the neighbor who turns bad, the ordinary man who makes terrible choices under pressure, and David apparently found the comedy in that situation by playing with the gap between Ralph's self-justifying internal logic and the obvious wrongness of his actions. Between takes, he would apparently remain in character in a very specific way, offering elaborate and completely straight-faced rationalizations for Ralph's behavior that became increasingly convoluted and increasingly funny, essentially doing an extended improvisation of the world's most self-deluded man trying to convince himself that everything he is doing is reasonable and justified. Gerard and Morena apparently found this irresistible, and David's commitment to the bit meant that it could go on for as long as anyone wanted it to. Scott Glenn, who as the most experienced member of the cast carried with him decades of stories from some of the most celebrated sets in Hollywood history, was apparently a source of endless entertainment for the younger cast members during the quieter moments of production. He has a storyteller's gift for observation and detail, and the stories he told about working on The Silence of the Lambs, about working with Robert Altman on Nashville, about his time in the Marines and how it compared to various intense film productions he had been part of, kept the cast and crew riveted during breaks. He apparently has a particularly dry and understated sense of humor that makes his stories land with a kind of quiet impact, and Gerard Butler, who clearly has a deep admiration for Scott's career and experience, was frequently his most enthusiastic audience. One of the funnier running situations on set apparently stemmed from the Georgia heat, which was a constant and democratic inconvenience for everyone involved in the production regardless of their role or their status. Film productions in hot weather climates develop their own particular culture around managing the heat, with elaborate systems of portable fans, cooling stations, shade structures, and hydration protocols that take on an almost ritualistic importance. Gerard Butler, who had trained for roles in conditions that most people would consider extreme, apparently took the Georgia heat entirely in stride while various crew members and background performers suffered ostentatiously around him, and he developed a bit of a reputation on set for cheerfully refusing to acknowledge that the temperature was in any way remarkable, essentially treating the complaints of everyone around him as evidence of their insufficient dedication to the craft. The visual effects discussions on set also apparently generated their share of unintentional comedy, particularly in the early stages of production when the visual effects team was using what the industry calls pre-visualization, essentially rough computer-generated animations that showed the director and cast what the finished visual effects sequences will look like, to help plan and execute the scenes. Pre-visualization in the early stages of production is not polished or beautiful. It is rough and often slightly absurd looking, with digital characters that move in ways that are almost but not quite right, and environmental destruction that can look more comical than catastrophic when it is not yet finished. The entire cast apparently had a field day watching the early pre-visualization of the comet impact sequences, with Gerard leading the commentary on the gap between what they were currently looking at and what the finished film was intended to convey. The production also had its share of the kind of practical on-set mishaps and unexpected situations that every film production generates, and that, when they do not cause genuine problems, become the stories that cast and crew tell for years afterward. Equipment malfunctions, unexpected weather changes, the logistical complexities of managing hundreds of extras in a confined space, the challenges of filming with a child actor whose energy and attention naturally operate on a different schedule from the demands of a professional production. All of these things generated moments of chaos and confusion that the people involved navigated with good humor and professionalism. Rick Roman is described by everyone who has worked with him as a director who genuinely loves the process of filmmaking, not just the finished product but the daily reality of being on set with creative people trying to bring a story to life. That love for the process creates an atmosphere on set that makes laughter and genuine human connection not just possible but inevitable, and the production of Greenland apparently had that atmosphere in abundance. What is perhaps most interesting about the funny moments from the making of Greenland is what they reveal about the people who made it. A film about the end of the world, about the worst thing that could possibly happen to humanity, was made by a group of people who laughed every day, who found joy in each other's company, who used humor as a tool for sustaining the creative energy and the human connection that great dramatic filmmaking requires. And perhaps that is the most honest and most hopeful thing you can say about this film and the people behind it. They understood, in the most practical and immediate way, exactly what the film is ultimately about. That life, even in the face of catastrophe, is worth showing up for fully, with everything you have, including your laughter. The historical roots of the disaster genre and where Greenland fits to truly understand the cultural and historical significance of Greenland as a film, you have to go back much further than 2020. You have to go back to the very beginning of humanity's relationship with the idea of catastrophe, because the story that Greenland tells is not a modern invention. It is one of the oldest stories in human history, told and retold across thousands of years of civilization, and the film is simply the most recent chapter in an extraordinarily long narrative tradition that stretches from ancient mythology all the way to a streaming platform near you. Human beings have always told stories about the end of the world. This is not a coincidence, and it is not simply a morbid fascination with destruction. It reflects something deep and fundamental about human psychology. The need to imaginatively rehearse the worst possible scenarios as a way of processing fear, of testing our values under extreme conditions, and of asking the questions that ordinary comfortable life does not force us to confront. What would you do if everything was taken away? What do you owe to strangers when your own survival is at stake? What makes life worth living when the structures that normally give it meaning have collapsed entirely? These are not entertainment questions. They are philosophical and moral questions of the deepest kind, and disaster narratives have always been one of the primary vehicles through which human cultures work through them. The oldest disaster narratives in recorded human history are flood myths, and they appear across virtually every culture on Earth with a consistency that is one of the most remarkable patterns in comparative mythology. The story of Noah in the Hebrew Bible, in which God sends a great flood to destroy a corrupt humanity, and one righteous man is chosen to survive and carry life forward, is the most familiar version in the Western tradition. But nearly identical stories appear in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest written texts in human history, dating back to ancient Mesopotamia more than 4,000 years ago. Flood myths appear in ancient Greek mythology, in the traditions of indigenous peoples across the Americas, in Hindu scriptures, in the oral traditions of cultures across Africa, Asia, and Australia. The universality of this story type suggests that it is addressing something so fundamental to human experience and human anxiety that it independently emerged in cultures that had no contact with each other. What connects all of these ancient flood myths to Greenland is not just the surface similarity of catastrophic destruction. It is the deeper structural similarity of the narrative, a world that has become corrupted or is simply subject to forces beyond human control, a chosen group of survivors who must endure terrible hardship and loss to reach a place of safety, and ultimately the hope of rebuilding and beginning again. Greenland follows this ancient template with remarkable fidelity, even though it is set in modern America and the mechanism of destruction is a comet rather than a divine flood. The Garrity family is, in the deepest structural sense, Noah and his family. Greenland, the island where the bunkers are located, is the mountain where the ark comes to rest. And the moment when the survivors emerge from underground into a changed but still living world is the moment the dove returns with the olive branch. This is not an accidental or superficial connection. The writers and directors who make disaster films are, whether consciously or not, drawing on this ancient narrative tradition, and the reason these stories continue to resonate across centuries and cultures is precisely because they are not really about the disaster at all. They are about what human beings are made of when everything else is stripped away. The Cold War and the culture of survival, the specific form that disaster narratives took in 20th century American culture, was shaped enormously by the Cold War. The decades-long geopolitical standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union that lasted from the end of World War II in 1945 until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. The Cold War introduced something genuinely new into the disaster narrative tradition, the possibility of a man-made apocalypse so total and so sudden that no preparation or heroism could prevent it, only survive it, the development and deployment of nuclear weapons, and the subsequent arms race that saw both the United States and the Soviet Union accumulate arsenals capable of destroying all life on Earth many times over, created a psychological reality that had no historical precedent. For the first time in human history, ordinary people had to genuinely reckon with the possibility that the world might end not through some natural catastrophe or divine intervention but through a human decision made in a moment of miscalculation, miscommunication, or madness. And the end would come not slowly, not with time to gather your family and drive to safety, but in minutes, in the form of a blinding flash followed by nothing. This reality produced a distinctive culture of preparedness and survival planning that permeated American society throughout the Cold War decades. Civil defense programs instructed citizens on how to build and stock fallout shelters, how to respond to nuclear alerts, and what to do in the aftermath of a nuclear attack. School children practiced duck and cover drills, crouching under their desks in the entirely inadequate hope that this gesture might somehow protect them from the heat and blast of a nuclear detonation. The federal government built extensive underground facilities and bunkers designed to allow the continuity of government in the aftermath of a nuclear war, facilities buried deep in mountain rock in locations like Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado and Raven Rock Mountain in Pennsylvania. This Cold War culture of survival planning, of government-selected survivors being transported to underground bunkers while the world above is destroyed, is the direct historical ancestor of the scenario depicted in Greenland. The film's premise, in which the government has pre-selected certain individuals and families for transport to underground shelters in Greenland, draws explicitly on this Cold War legacy. The idea that the government would have a list, that some people would be chosen and others would not, that military aircraft would transport the selected to a place of safety while the rest of humanity was left to face what was coming, is not a science fiction invention. It is a fairly accurate description of the actual emergency planning that Western governments conducted during the Cold War, planning that was kept secret from the public precisely because the moral and political implications of a government openly admitting that it had decided who would survive a nuclear war were too explosive to manage. The film engages with this history in a way that feels both contemporary and deeply rooted in the American cultural experience. When John Garrity receives his presidential notification, the emotional complexity of that moment, the mixture of relief at being chosen and guilt at being chosen when your neighbors have not been, is an emotional complexity that has been part of the American cultural imagination since the Cold War civil defense programs of the 1950s and 1960s. Who gets to survive, and on what basis is that decision made, and what does it say about the values of the society making it? These are questions that Greenland asks very directly and very honestly, and they are questions with deep historical roots in the specific American experience of the nuclear age. Comets in human history and culture, the specific mechanism of destruction in Greenland, a comet, also carries a rich and fascinating cultural and historical weight that adds layers of meaning to the film that a casual viewer might not consciously register but that contribute significantly to its emotional impact. Throughout human history, comets have been objects of profound cultural significance, almost universally interpreted as omens of catastrophe, divine warning, or world-changing events. The appearance of a comet in the sky was, for most of human history, an event of enormous religious and political consequence, not a matter of astronomical curiosity but a message from the heavens that something momentous was about to happen. The Bayeux Tapestry, the extraordinary 11th-century embroidery that depicts the events surrounding the Norman conquest of England in 1066, includes a famous panel showing the appearance of Halley's Comet in 1066, and the terror it inspired in the English population who witnessed it. The comet appears above a group of frightened men who point upward in dismay, and the accompanying Latin text can be translated as indicating that they are marveling at the star, while below them King Harold is shown receiving what are clearly bad tidings. The comet was understood by the English as a harbinger of the disaster that followed when William the Conqueror defeated Harold at the Battle of Hastings and changed the course of English history forever. And they were not wrong, in the sense that the comet did indeed precede a catastrophic event, even if the comet did not cause it. Halley's Comet, which returns to the inner solar system approximately every 75 to 76 years and has therefore been observed and recorded by human beings across many centuries, has been associated with an extraordinary range of historically significant events.